Sometimes I think this house knows more about me than I know about myself. 30 years. 30 goddamn years we've shared the same fate. I put a piece of myself into it when I built it, and in return it has absorbed all my joys and sorrows, multiplied the former, and helped me through the latter. My house in Aurora is on a hill with a veranda overlooking the river. 2 floors, 5 bedrooms, a spacious living room, the kitchen Ophelia had always dreamed of. When we moved here, Octavia was 6 years old. She ran around the empty rooms laughing and screaming, her voice echoing through the still uninhabited walls. I would lift her up on my shoulders so she could reach the ceiling. "Daddy, when I grow up, I'm going to live here with my kids and you and Mommy will live with us," she said then. How we laughed, how happy we were. I run my palm along the wooden railing of the stairs. Each step is polished by my hands. Every inch of this house is as familiar to me as my own body. In some places, I can point to a wall and tell you exactly what is behind it: an electrical wire, a water pipe, a floor beam. I remember how I mounted each outlet. I know where I had to deviate from the original plan and why. The windows in the living room face east so that sunlight floods the room in the mornings. Ophelia loved to eat breakfast in the sunlight. I rarely use the living room now. After Ophelia left, I moved into the small study next to the kitchen. There now stands my worn-out armchair, a television, and a small table. I sit there for hours poring over old blueprints and schematics. The old habits of an electrical engineer die hard. Ophelia left 5 years ago. Cancer is a ruthless foe. We fought for 3 years but lost. She died in our bedroom, looking out over the garden we planted together. Octavia was by her side, holding her mother's hand. We were still a family then. After the funeral, my daughter stayed with me for a week. We hardly spoke. Everyone was grieving in their own way. Then she went back to her apartment in the center of Aurora. We agreed that she would come on weekends. For the first few months she did. She would bring groceries, cook for the week ahead. We would look at old family photos and reminisce about Ophelia. Everything changed when Ambrose Pendergast came into Octavia's life. Tall, with perfect posture and a rehearsed smile, he worked in a law firm and, according to Octavia, had excellent prospects. When she first brought him into the house, I sensed something amiss. Ambrose looked around the rooms not as a guest, but as a real estate appraiser. His gaze glided over the walls, the furniture, the windows, as if estimating value. "It's an excellent house, Mr. Bellingham," he said, shaking my hand. "Octavia tells me you built it yourself." "Yes, every nail, every board," I said, not hiding my pride. "Impressive. Not many people can do that these days. It must take a lot of effort to maintain such a big house." Even then, I should have sensed what he was getting at, but I just shrugged. "I'm getting by. My arms haven't fallen off yet." Sure, he agreed hastily. "It's just that this house, it's like it's made for a big family." Octavia and Ambrose started seeing each other. My Sunday lunches with my daughter became a rarity. She'd call, apologize, explain she was busy. I knew a new relationship took time. I didn't want to be a burden, so I didn't insist. A year later, they got married. The wedding was modest but elegant. I first met Ambrose's parents, Ebenezer and Prosperina Pendergast. They were a solid couple in their 60s, dressed with the kind of ostentatious elegance that betrays people who want to appear richer than they are. Ebenezer introduced himself as a retired financial consultant and Prosperina as a former gallery owner. They addressed me with an emphasized politeness that was more akin to condescension. At the wedding, I felt superfluous. Ambrose's parents took center stage in all the photos, while I only got a few shots with my daughter. I wasn't seated next to the newlyweds, but at the end of the table with the Pendergast relatives. I didn't make a scene. It was Octavia's day, and I wanted her to be happy. 6 months passed after the wedding before the young people came to visit me again. This time, Ambrose's parents were with them. Octavia had warned me the day before the visit. "Daddy, we're coming over tomorrow for lunch. Ambrose's parents are coming, and they're very anxious to see your house. Do you mind?" "Of course not. I'd love to see you all," I answered, though I was uneasy about the phrase, "getting to know the house, not me." I made dinner, making sure everything was perfect. I set the table in the dining room, which I hadn't used much since Ophelia's death. Got the best wine from the cellar. I wanted Octavia to be proud of me. They arrived around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Ambrose was driving his brand new BMW Octavia beside him, with Ebenezer and Prosperina sitting in the back seat. I met them on the doorstep. "Welcome," I said, hugging my daughter. Ambrose shook my hand and his parents nodded demurely. I led them into the living room, offered them drinks. We didn't have much conversation. Ebenezer talked about acquaintances I didn't know. Prosperina commented on the interior, not rudely, but with a hint that it could use some updating. Octavia seemed tense. She hardly made eye contact with me. After lunch, I offered my guests a tour of the house. To my surprise, they agreed enthusiastically, especially Ebenezer. We toured every room, including the empty bedrooms on the second floor. "This room would be perfect for a nursery," Prosperina remarked, peering into Octavia's former room. "So much light and space." "Yes, this used to be Octavia's room," I replied. "Oh dear, that's not what I meant," Prosperina said hastily. "I was talking about the future, about grandchildren." "Of course," I smiled, though I didn't like her tone. It was as if the room already belonged to her, not to me. In my study, Ebenezer was interested in a collection of old books. "It's a beautiful library," he said, running his finger along the spines. "But I would move these shelves to another room. This office would make a great billiard room." "I've always wanted a billiard room." I didn't say anything. Why argue with a man who would probably never set foot in my house again? As he descended the stairs, Ebenezer scrutinized the banister. "Good workmanship. You don't find that kind of workmanship these days. How old did you say this house was?" 30. "And no problems with the utilities? No leaking pipes? No wiring problems?" "They're fine. I do regular maintenance." "That's commendable," he nodded. "A lot of older people neglect these things, and then the houses fall into disrepair." Older people. He spoke of me as if I were a frail old man, not a 65-year-old man who could still do 10 pull-ups. After the tour of the house, Ebenezer suggested a walk around the property. We went out into the yard, where I proudly showed them the garden Ophelia and I had spent years creating. Prosperina looked critically at the flower beds. "Too many different colors," she said. "I would have preferred a more conceptual approach. Maybe only white flowers or only certain shades. And those apple trees should be replaced with ornamental plums. They're more spectacular." I looked at the apple trees I planted with Ophelia 30 years ago. They produced beautiful fruit, which she used to make marvelous pies. "I like apple trees," I said. "They're part of the history of this house." "Sentimental, but not practical," Prosperina retorted. "Fruit trees require constant care, and falling fruit attracts insects." Ebenezer, meanwhile, was studying the boundaries of the plot. "You could expand here," he said, pointing to a neighboring vacant lot. "Build an indoor pool or a tennis court." "Why would I need a tennis court?" I wondered. "I don't play tennis." "Not for you," he said. "For grandchildren, for guests. It would increase the value of the property." I felt annoyed. They were talking about my house as if they already owned it and were planning to remodel it. But for Octavia's sake, I held back and only smiled. Maybe someday. Back at the house, I noticed Octavia and Ambrose whispering in the corner of the living room. When they saw me, they stopped talking. Octavia looked guilty. "Daddy, we have to go," she said. "Thank you for lunch." "You're leaving already?" I couldn't hide my disappointment. "I thought you were staying for dinner." "Unfortunately, we have other plans," Ambrose interjected. "However, dinner with colleagues, a very important meeting." "I see." I walked them to the car. Octavia gave me a big hug as she said goodbye. "I'll call you, Daddy," she said. "Of course, darling." Ebenezer shook my hand. "It's a beautiful house, Mr. Bellingham." "It is. You're a lucky man." There was envy in his words and something else. Determination, as if he had already made up his mind about me and my house. After they left, I sat on the veranda for a long time, looking at the darkening sky. For the first time in years, I felt unprotected in my own home, as if its walls, which held my secrets and memories, had suddenly become transparent to other people's greedy eyes. Octavia called a week later. The conversation was short and tense. She asked how I was doing. I asked about her work. We exchanged general phrases, avoiding talking about important things. She didn't mention the next visit, and I didn't bother to remind her. After that, the calls became even less frequent. She used to come at least once a month, but now it was 2 or 3 months between visits. Each time she found a new excuse: work, fatigue, plans with friends. I didn't blame her. A young woman has other things to do than visit her elderly father. But I missed her. I missed our former closeness, missed her laughter in this too big and too empty house. On the rare occasions when she did come, the Pendergasts were often with her, either Ambrose or the whole family. And each time they studied my house with undisguised interest, discussing possible changes as if they were trying it on for themselves. Their cavalier behavior hurt me, but I didn't want to create conflict. Octavia was changing. There were new turns of phrase in her speech, clearly adopted from Prosperina, in her manners, aloofness and arrogance, not peculiar to my daughter before. She became more critical of me and of the house, noticing dust on the shelves or inadequate appliances. "Daddy, you need to hire an au pair," she said during one visit. "You're not doing a good job." "I'm doing just fine," I countered, "and I don't need strangers in the house." "Stubbornness," she sighed, just like Prosperina used to. Old stubbornness. I was 65 years old. My parents lived to be 85 and 90, respectively. I was barely past the halfway point, and my daughter was already writing me off. One day, my old friend Lloyd Hobbs came to town. We hadn't seen each other in about 10 years since he'd moved to California. Lloyd was a co-worker of mine when I worked for the electric company and then became a close family friend. He came down for business and stayed with me for a couple days. In the evening, sitting on the veranda with glasses of whiskey, we reminisced about the past and discussed the present. I told him about the Pendergasts and their strange interest in my house. "They talk about it as if they already owned it," I complained, "and Octavia is succumbing to their influence." Lloyd frowned. "Maybe it's more than just interest," he said. "I've heard of the Pendergasts from mutual acquaintances. They were once very wealthy, but have been in financial difficulties for the last few years. Ebenezer lost a considerable sum on bad investments, and their house in the suburbs is mortgaged and remortgaged." "How do you know that?" I wondered. "Alruino. The financial world is small," Lloyd shrugged, "and rumors travel fast. Be careful of them, Humphrey. They might see your house as a solution to their problems." I dismissed his words. Octavia would never allow herself to be manipulated by them. She had always been independent and sensible. But Lloyd's words struck a chord in my heart, making me take a closer look at the behavior of the Pendergasts and my daughter. The day after Lloyd left, I met a neighbor, Norris Pratt. We had lived next door for all 30 years, often helping each other with minor repairs or shoveling snow in the winter. "I haven't seen your daughter in a while," he said as we stood at the fence separating our lots. "She's busy," I replied. "New family. Work." "I understand," he nodded. "And those who came with her last time, the Pendergasts, right? Slippery types." "Why do you say that?" Norris lowered his voice, though there was no one around. "My sister lives in the same neighborhood as them. She says the Pendergasts are in a lot of debt. The bank sent 3 late notices on their mortgage, and their son, this Ambrose, he's changed his car twice in the last year, living beyond his means." I remembered Lloyd's words and felt uneasy. I didn't want to believe that my daughter and my house could be part of some Pendergast plan to solve their financial problems. "It's just a rumor," I said, more to convince myself than Norris. "Maybe," he agreed. "But your daughter, she's changed since she got married. She's like them." I couldn't agree more. Octavia had indeed changed. She used to love this house, to think of it as her home. Now when she came to visit, she looked at it with a critical Pendergast eye, as an asset to be used, not as a family nest full of memories. That night I couldn't sleep for a long time. I lay in the bedroom I'd once shared with Ophelia and thought about the future. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe the Pendergasts are just taking a normal interest in the house where their son's wife grew up. Maybe I'm becoming an imaginative old man, seeing a threat where there isn't one. But something told me the Pendergasts were interested in my house for a reason. And unfortunately, Octavia, my only daughter, seems to be completely on their side. Autumn in Aurora has always been my favorite season. The leaves of the apple trees Ophelia and I had planted would turn golden red, and the garden would become like the impressionist paintings she loved so much. On such days, I felt her absence especially keenly. I was sitting on the veranda with a cup of coffee, watching the wind play with the fallen leaves, when I heard the sound of a car pull up. Octavia. I wasn't expecting her today. She usually gave me advance notice of her visits. Did something happen? She got out of the car alone, without Ambrose or his parents, which was already unusual for the last few months. Her hair, which had fallen loosely around her shoulders, was now arranged in an elaborate style that made her look like Prosperina. She wore a strict gray coat and high-heeled shoes, not the most comfortable shoes for walking in the garden. "Daddy," she kissed me on the cheek. "How are you?" "I'm fine, darling." "An unexpected visit. Something wrong?" No, I just thought I'd stop by." "Are you alone?" "Who do you think could be with me?" I grinned. She didn't smile back. I meant if you had company." "Ile yen." "Come in. I was just about to make dinner." We went into the house. Octavia went straight into the living room, looking around as if she were here for the first time, or rather assessing what had changed since her last visit. "Papa, don't you think this house is too big for one person?" And here was the reason for the surprise visit. I felt an unpleasant chill. The conversation I'd been subconsciously waiting for and dreading had begun. "No, I don't think so," I replied calmly. "I'm comfortable here. But 5 bedrooms, a large living room, an office, and all this for one person? How much do you spend on heating in the winter?" "So, enough to stay warm," I said, not wanting to go into financial details. "See, Ambrose and I were talking the other day. There are excellent condominiums for the elderly with 24-hour medical supervision. I'm 65, Octavia. I don't need nursing care. Not now, but eventually." She hesitated when she saw the look on my face. "Okay, let's not talk about that now. I just wanted to say that you might be happier in a smaller place. Without those endless ladders, without having to tend the garden." "I like stairs," I objected. "They keep me in shape. And I like the garden. It's my mom's and my garden." Octavia flinched slightly at the mention of Ophelia. We used to talk about her a lot, but now her daughter avoided the subject. "Of course, Papa. I'm just worried about you." "Don't be, I'm doing just fine." She was visibly upset at my stubbornness. I guess she was hoping for an easier conversation. "Let's go to the kitchen," I suggested to change the subject. "I'll make us some lunch." In the kitchen, I started chopping vegetables for the salad. Octavia sat at the table watching me. "Ambrose's parents talk about your house a lot," she said casually. "They say it's gorgeous." "I'm glad they like it," I said dryly. "Ebenezer says a house like this deserves to be filled with life, with children's laughter. He thinks a large family should live here." I put the knife down and turned to my daughter. "Octavia, where are you going with this?" She looked away. "It's nothing. Just a conversation. If Ebenezer is so eager to fill the house with children's laughter, let him have more children or buy his own house." "Daddy!" she exclaimed, clearly shocked by my harshness. "How can you say that? They're practically your relatives." "No, Octavia. They are your husband's relatives, not mine. And my house is my house. I built it with my own hands for my family. I'm not going to move just because someone thinks I don't deserve to live in the house I built." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or manipulative, another trick learned from Prosperina Pendergast. "I just wanted what was best for you," she said in a shaky voice. "It's hard for you alone in such a big house. Ambrose and we need space. We're planning children and that's why I have to give up my house?" I interrupted. "There are plenty of other houses, Octavia. Buy or build your own." "We can't afford it right now," she admitted. "But in time, maybe you could move into an outhouse. We could build a little house for you in the far corner of the garden. Then you could stay close by and we could keep an eye on you." I felt anger building up inside. "I don't need looking after, Octavia, and I'm not going to become a squatter in my own home. If you and Ambrose want to have children, fine. But do it in your own house, not mine." She got up from the table. "I can see it's no use talking to you. You've always been stubborn. At least Mom could influence you, but Don't bring Mom into this," I said sharply. "She would never approve of what you're doing now." It was a low blow, and I realized it as soon as the words were out of my mouth. Octavia turned pale. "You don't know what she would approve of," she said quietly. "You're locked in the past, Papa, in this big, empty house filled with ghosts." Arashakim, better to live with ghosts than with people who only see you as a hindrance to their plans. She grabbed her purse and headed for the exit. I'm not listening to this. Call me when you're ready to have a normal conversation. Octavia left, slamming the door loudly. I stayed in the kitchen looking at the uncut vegetables and feeling devastated. Our first real conflict in years. And over what? The house, the walls and the roof. Was a material thing more important than our relationship? But it wasn't about material things. This house was part of me, part of Ophelia and me, a legacy I wanted to leave to my daughter. Not for her to pass it on to the Pendergasts, but to keep the memory of us, of her roots. The next day Ambrose called. His voice was unusually soft, which alarmed me. Humphrey, I wanted to apologize for last night, he said. Octavia came back very upset. We didn't mean to offend you. Don't worry, Ambrose. Fathers and daughters sometimes have disagreements. Absolutely. Look, my parents and I would like to come over this weekend. We'd like to discuss things calmly, without emotion. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. I doubted there was such a solution, but I didn't refuse to talk to you. All right, I'll see you Saturday afternoon. Great, Chuckles. And, Humphrey, we really appreciate your house. It's a work of art. After that call, I felt a vague unease. Something didn't add up. If the Pendergasts valued my house so highly as a work of art, why was Prosperina planning to cut down the apple trees and remodel the interior? No, it wasn't the value of the house per se, but its value in the real estate market. I remembered what Lloyd and Norris had said about the Pendergasts' financial problems. Maybe that was the reason for their persistent interest in my house. Did they see it as a solution to their problems? And Octavia, was she just a puppet in their hands? I decided to test that theory. On Friday, the day before the Pendergasts' visit, I went to the center of Aurora. Ambrose's office was in a modern glass and concrete building, a solid law firm, Harrington and Associates. I hadn't planned to go inside. I just wanted to make sure that Ambrose really worked there, that his excellent prospects weren't fiction. I took up a position in the cafe across from the office and watched. At about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Ambrose came out of the building. He was not alone. An elderly man in an expensive suit, probably one of the firm's partners, was walking beside him. They were talking, and judging from their body language, the conversation was tense. The man was saying something to Ambrose, and Ambrose was making excuses with his hands. Then they shook hands, and Ambrose hurried away. Intrigued, I decided to follow him. He walked a few blocks and entered the bank building. He came out half an hour later with an even more somber expression than before. That evening, I called an old acquaintance of mine, Malcolm Grierson, who worked in banking. We hadn't spoken to each other for several years, but we had once been quite close. Malcolm, this is Humphrey Bellingham. Remember me? Humphrey, of course I do. How are you, old boy? We exchanged pleasantries. I told him of Ophelia's death. He offered his condolences. Then I got down to business. What, Malcolm, are you still working at First National? Yes, although I'm thinking of retiring. What can I do for you? I need information on the Pendergast family, Ebenezer and Prosperina, their son Ambrose. Nothing illegal, just want to know how financially stable they are. The Pendergasts? He thought about it. The name sounds familiar. Give me a couple of days, I'll make inquiries. Thanks, Malcolm, I owe you one. On Saturday, as arranged, the Pendergasts arrived in time for lunch. Octavia looked tense but determined. Ambrose was emphatically polite, and his parents radiated fake friendliness. We sat down at the table, and I served the roast, Ophelia's favorite dish. The conversation was uneventful. Everyone avoided sharp topics, discussing the weather and the latest city news. After dessert, Ebenezer coughed. Humphrey, we'd like to get back to talking about your house. I'm listening, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. You see, Prosperina and I have long dreamed of a house in this neighborhood. It has beautiful views, good infrastructure. And your house, it's just gorgeous. The quality of construction, the lot. What are you getting at, Ebenezer? We'd like to offer you a deal, Prosperina intervened. You sell us the house, and we'll help you find something more, suited to your present needs. And if my current needs include living in a house I built with my own hands, was I asked? Daddy, Octavia said, this house is too big for you. You can't take care of it properly. Remember last winter when the roof leaked? And last month you complained about heating problems. Minor problems that I fixed myself, I countered. I'm an engineer, remember? A former engineer, Prosperina corrected me gently. And as the years go by, it gets harder and harder to deal with these things. I glanced at Ambrose, who was still silent. What do you say, Ambrose? Why my house? There are plenty of other houses for sale in Aurora. He fidgeted in his chair. You see, Humphrey, it's a family matter. Octavia grew up here, and she has many memories associated with this house. We'd like our future children to have the opportunity to live in their grandfather's house? I interrupted. But grandfather wants to live in his house too. It's an amazing coincidence, isn't it? We're not suggesting you go nowhere, Ebenezer said. We could buy you an apartment downtown. Or, as Octavia said, build a little house on the edge of the lot. That's a generous offer, I grinned. Move me out of my own house and into an annex. Dad, you're making this so complicated, Octavia sighed. We want what's best. For whom, dear? For me or for your husband's family? At that moment, my phone rang. It was Malcolm. I apologized and went out into the hallway. Humphrey, I have the information you asked for, he said without preamble. The Pendergasts are up to their eyeballs in debt. Their house is mortgaged at 3 banks, and they have credit card debt. Ebenezer lost most of his savings on bad investments. And young Pendergast, he's on the verge of quitting the firm. Lost a big case. Clients filed a complaint. Thank you, Malcolm, I said. That explains a lot. I returned to the dining room with a new understanding of the situation. Everything fell into place now. The persistent interest in my house, the attempts to convince me that I couldn't afford it, Ambrose's strange behavior. They saw my house as a way to solve their financial problems. So, I said, sitting down at the table, let me get this straight. You don't want my house because you value its architecture or care about me. You want a valuable asset that you can use to solve your financial problems. Am I right, Ebenezer? He went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. What about the 3 mortgages on your current home? Or the failed investment that robbed you of most of your savings? Prosperina made a strange sound, something between a sigh and a groan. Who told you that? Ebenezer asked sharply. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you are trying to manipulate my daughter and me to get my house. Octavia shifted a confused look from me to the Pendergasts. Is it true? She asked Ambrose. Are you in debt? Temporary difficulties, he said through gritted teeth. Nothing serious. Then why didn't you tell me? There was resentment in her voice. We're family. Because it's none of your business, he snapped at her, but then he realized it was none of your business. I'm sorry, darling. I didn't mean to bother you. Everything's under control. Shannon, under control. I couldn't contain my sarcasm. So under control that you're trying to evict an elderly man from his own home? We just offered a mutually beneficial deal, Prosperina said coldly. Nothing illegal. Maybe, but something tells me that if I agreed to sell you the house, you would quickly forget your promise to provide me with a new home. Ebenezer got up from the table. I don't have to listen to these insults. Let's go, Prosperina. They headed for the exit. Ambrose took Octavia's hand, but she pulled away. I want to speak to my father, she said. Alone. I was sure that by now my daughter and I would be on the same page. But the next day, to my surprise, she arrived with the Pendergasts and gave me news that left the ground beneath my feet. Papa, she said, looking me straight in the eye, you don't need such a big house, and my husband's parents need a bigger house. Move out. I couldn't believe my ears. What did you say? You heard me. Her voice sounded harsh, just like Prosperina's. The house is mine now. I've signed it over to myself. What? How is that possible? Ambrose pulled the papers out of his briefcase. Very simple, Humphrey. Remember that power of attorney you signed when you were sick 2 years ago? You gave Octavia power of attorney over your estate, and she exercised that right. I stared at them, unable to believe what was happening. The power of attorney. Sure, I signed it when I was in the hospital with pneumonia, but it was temporary, just for the duration of my illness, wasn't it? Show it to me, I demanded. Ambrose handed me the papers. I scrutinized them. looking for error, forgery, anything. But everything was legitimate. There was no expiration date on the power of attorney, so legally it was still valid. That's impossible, I mumbled. I've never given an open-ended power of attorney. But you signed the document, Ambrose smiled. And now the house belongs to Octavia, and she's been kind enough to let me and my parents live here. What will happen to me? I asked, looking at my daughter. She looked away. We found you an apartment in the center of the city. It's small, but it's comfortable. You need to move in by next Saturday. A week from next Saturday? You're giving me a week to leave the house I built with my own hands? The house where your mother and I were happy? The house where you grew up? Don't be dramatic, Daddy, she sighed. It's just a building. You can be happy somewhere else. I stared at her, trying to see my daughter in this cold, calculating woman, the little girl I'd once held in my arms, taught to ride her bike, read bedtime stories to. What have they done to you, Octavia? I asked quietly. Nothing, she cut me off. I just grew up and started making rational decisions. Unlike you. I realized it was useless to argue. They had already made up their minds for me, and they had legal grounds. I could try to challenge the power of attorney in court, but that would take months, maybe years, and there's no guarantee I'd win. Okay, I said finally. Give me a week. I'll move out. They exchanged surprised glances, apparently expecting more serious resistance. That's good, Ebenezer said, rubbing his hands together. I knew you were a reasonable man, Humphrey. Just give me the keys to this apartment and the address, I said tiredly, and leave me alone. I need to pack my things. They left, leaving me alone in a house that no longer belonged to me. I sat in my chair looking out the window at the garden and felt a cold rage growing inside. Not so much grief as cold fury. They thought they had won, that I had surrendered, but they didn't really know me. They didn't know what I was capable of. I went down to the basement where I kept my tools and blueprints. I knew this house better than anyone else. Every wire, every pipe, every vent. I wasn't just a builder. I was an electrical engineer, an expert in smart home systems. And I could use that knowledge. The Pendergasts wanted my house? Well, let them have it. But I'm gonna make them regret their decision. I would turn their dream into a nightmare. I pulled out old wiring diagrams and started making notes. Ideas were already forming in my head. Little modifications, unnoticeable to the layman, but capable of making life in the house a living hell. I worked all night planning my surprise for the new tenants. The apartment they chose for me turned out to be even worse than I expected. A cramped one-bedroom in an old house on the outskirts of Aurora, overlooking an abandoned parking lot and peeling walls. After the spacious house I'd built with my own hands, the place felt like a prison cell. I'd moved the bare minimum clothes, a few books, pictures of Ophelia and young Octavia. I left the rest in the house, including furniture and appliances. Let the Pendergasts think I had resigned myself to defeat. That would make my surprise even more unexpected. The last night before I left, I finalized all the arrangements. I reprogrammed the smart home system, installed additional devices in hidden places, and created redundant remote access channels. Everything looked fine on superficial inspection, but behind the facade was a complex network of modifications. In the morning, the Pendergasts arrived in 2 trucks. I met them on the porch with a small suitcase in hand. Afon, is everything ready? Ambrose asked, not hiding his impatience. Yes, I answered briefly. Take the house. I hope you will be happy in it. Octavia looked guilty but determined. She hesitated to meet my gaze. Dad, we left you the keys to the new apartment on the kitchen table, along with the address and all the papers. Thank you for your concern, I said with barely concealed sarcasm. Ebenezer and Prosperina had already entered the house and were eagerly inspecting their new possession. I heard Prosperina exclaim with delight when she discovered the marble countertops in the kitchen that I had installed 15 years ago. Shri. Well, I'll leave you to it, I said, turning to Octavia and Ambrose. Enjoy your new home. Papa, Octavia took a step toward me. I hope you realize that we are doing this for your own good. Of course, darling, I replied with a fake smile. I understand. I turned around and walked to my old car. Without looking back, I got behind the wheel and drove away from the house that no longer belonged to me. In the rearview mirror, I saw the movers begin to remove the Pendergast furniture from the trucks. My new dwelling was even more dismal than it had appeared upon first inspection. A cramped room, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom I could barely turn around in. The ceiling was so low that my head was almost touching it. All I could see out the window was the brick firewall of the neighboring building. I unpacked, arranged the books on the only shelf, hung the pictures on the wall. Then I pulled a small laptop out of my suitcase, the only valuable thing I'd brought with me. It had software installed on it that allowed me to remotely control the systems of my house. I turned on the computer and started the program. The screen showed images from the cameras I had secretly installed in various parts of the house. I could see the Pendergasts fussing about arranging their furniture, Prosperina commanding the movers, Ebenezer looking around each room with an important look. Octavia and Ambrose were in the former children's room, apparently discussing future renovations. I turned up the sound. "This is going to be a great nursery," Octavia said. "So much light, so much space." "Yes, darling," Ambrose replied. "It just needs a complete redecoration." "Did your father choose this wallpaper?" "Yes, when I was a little girl." "Horrible taste. We'll change everything." I turned the sound off. Hearing them discuss the destruction of something I'd created with so much love was unbearable. For the first 2 days, I just watched them, learning their routines, their habits, their routes around the house. Ebenezer and Prosperina took over the master bedroom, Ophelia and I's former room. Octavia and Ambrose took the former guest room. They immediately began rearranging the furniture and decor, as if they were trying to erase all traces of our presence. On the third day, I decided it was time to get started. The first thing I did was activate a small modification to the heating system. Nothing dramatic, just random temperature fluctuations of 2 or 3 degrees in different rooms. Enough to cause discomfort, but not enough to immediately suspect a malfunction. In the evening, I watched Prosperina complain to Ebenezer that the bedroom was too cold, while he claimed that, on the contrary, it was hot. They checked the thermostat, but it was showing a normal temperature. Eventually, they wrote it off to a difference in perception and went to bed. The next day, I added another element: quiet, barely audible sounds in the walls, scraping, creaking, as if someone was moving in the space between the slabs. The sounds were random and infrequent enough that it was impossible to predict when they would reappear. In the evening, Ebenezer went down into the basement with a flashlight, trying to find the source of the noise. I saw him inspecting the walls, checking the pipes, pounding on the ceilings. Of course, he found nothing. The sounds were generated by miniature devices embedded in the walls in different parts of the house. "Must be mice," he said to Prosperina when he returned. "I'll call the exterminator tomorrow." "Mice in this house?" She was indignant. "Humphreys run the place into the ground." I grinned. There were never any mice in the house. I kept a careful eye on it. But let them think what they want. The exterminator came the next day, inspected the house, and found no sign of rodents. Ebenezer was annoyed and accused him of incompetence. He paid for the call and sent him away. And in the evening, the sounds resumed, only now they were louder and more distinct. I could see Prosperina flinch at every creak, Ebenezer looking around nervously, trying to determine the source. "Maybe it's just an old house," Octavia said. "It's been standing for 30 years. It's natural for structures to creak." "It's not a normal creak," Prosperina objected. "It sounds like someone walking between the walls." "Nonsense," Ambrose said. "No one can walk between walls. It's just your imagination." But I could see that he did not believe his own words. Every time there was a creak, he flinched and looked around. On the 5th day, I added electrical problems. Nothing dangerous, just flickering lights in different rooms, random TV shutdowns, strange interference on computer screens. It all looked like normal malfunctions in the old wiring, but it happened often enough to be annoying. Ebenezer called an electrician who spent the day checking the wiring, outlets, and switches. He found no problems and said the system was in excellent condition. "Maybe it's a problem with the city grid," he suggested. "Power surges can cause that." Ebenezer paid him double his normal rate, but he wasn't satisfied. I saw him arguing with Prosperina, accusing her of insisting on buying that damn house. "We could have bought a new house without all this trouble," he shouted. "With what money, Ebenezer?" She parried. "We barely had enough to move." Their financial problems were even more serious than I had realized. That explained why they were so desperate to get my house, for free, using Octavia's power of attorney. On the sixth day, I decided to add plumbing problems. Sometimes the water in the shower would suddenly turn ice cold. Other times it would get too hot. The faucets would start to leak and then just as suddenly stop. Rust appeared in the sinks, even though the pipes had been replaced only 5 years ago. Prosperina was furious. She called a plumber who, like the electrician before him, found no problems with the system. Shinam, all the pipes are new, quality pipes, he said. I don't see what the problem could be. But the water is ice cold or boiling. Prosperina was indignant. This is not normal. Maybe there's a problem with the boiler, suggested the plumber. I can check it, but it will cost extra. They agreed to check the boiler, but there was no problem there either. Ebenezer refused to pay, accusing the plumber of incompetence, and a row broke out between them, which ended only when Ambrose intervened and paid the full amount. I watched the whole thing with grim satisfaction. The house they were so eager to get was turning into a nightmare for them. But I was just getting started. On the seventh day, I activated the home alert system, the same one I'd installed for Ophelia when she was sick. Speakers were built into the walls throughout the house, and messages could be transmitted through them from any room to any other. At night, when everyone was asleep, I turned the system up to minimum volume and began broadcasting a low whisper. Nothing specific, just an unintelligible whisper, like someone talking behind a wall. Quiet enough to think it was just imagination, but distinct enough to wake her up. Prosperina was the first to wake up. I saw on the monitor as she sat up in bed listening. Then she woke Ebenezer. Do you hear that? She asked in a whisper. Shema, what? He mumbled sleepily. Someone is talking in the house. Ebenezer listened. I hear nothing, he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. There it is again. Prosperina clutched at his arm. Someone is whispering. I increased the volume by half a division. The whispering was a little clearer now, but I still couldn't make out the words. Ebenezer got out of bed and turned on the light. I'll check the house, he said, but it was obvious he was scared. He picked up the golf club that was by the bed and walked out of the bedroom. I followed him through the cameras set up in the hallway, on the stairs in the living room. He went around the entire first floor, looking in every room, checking windows and doors. Everything was locked, no sign of entry. As he walked back up the stairs, I turned on the whispering in the living room, just behind his back. He turned around sharply, but of course he saw no one. His face contorted with fear, and he hurried back into the bedroom. There is no one there, he said to Prosperina. All the doors and windows are locked. But I heard a whisper, she insisted. Someone was in the house. You must have been dreaming, he said, but it was evident that he did not believe it himself. The next morning they looked haggard, with circles under their eyes. At breakfast, Prosperina told Octavia and Ambrose about the night sounds. There was someone in the house, she asserted. I heard whispering. Mother, that's impossible, said Octavia. All the doors were locked, the alarm was on. Then what was it? Prosperina asked demandingly. I'm not crazy. I definitely heard a whisper. Maybe it was just the wind in the ventilation, suggested Ambrose. Or the water pipes. There are strange noises in old houses. The house isn't old, Octavia objected. Papa built it only 30 years ago, and he's always made sure it's in good condition. Everyone fell silent at the mention of me. I saw Octavia lower her eyes, clearly feeling guilty. At that moment, I decided to increase the effect. I turned on all the lights in the living room at the same time, then turned them off a second later. Then I turned on the television at full volume, and then just as suddenly turned it off. All four of us froze, looking at each other with consternation. What was that? Prosperina whispered. There must be a problem with the electricity, said Ambrose, but his voice trembled. I'll call the electrician again. We've already called the electrician, Ebenezer reminded him. He found nothing. Then we'll call another, more competent one. They continued to argue, and I watched them with grim satisfaction. My plan was working even better than I had expected. They were already beginning to question their decision to take the house. Over the next few days, I continued my manipulations. The strange noises in the walls, the whispering at night, the flickering lights. The water problems, all of it gradually drove the Pendergast crazy. They called specialist after specialist, but no one could find the cause of the problems. Octavia held out the longest. She tried to rationalize everything that was happening, writing off the oddities as imagination, weather conditions, random coincidences. But even her confidence began to fade when the drawers of the dresser in her former nursery, which they planned to turn into an office for Ambrose, began to open and close on their own. I saw her standing in the middle of the room, watching the phenomenon with an expression of absolute horror on her face. Then she ran out of the room and slammed the door shut. That evening of the same day, she tried to call me. I could see on the monitor as she sat in the living room with the phone in her hands, dialing my number over and over again. I didn't answer. Let her suffer the unknown like I had suffered when she betrayed me. After the 10th attempt, she left a voicemail. "Dad, it's me, Octavia. Please call me back. I need to talk to you. It's about the house. There's something strange going on, and I thought you might know what it is. Please call me." I deleted the message before I heard the rest of it. It's too late, Octavia. It's too late for remorse. On the 10th day, the Pendergasts were on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Prosperina refused to stay alone in the house. Ebenezer began to drink. Ambrose snapped at Octavia for the slightest reason. They hardly slept at all, constantly quarreling and blaming each other for their decision to move into that damned house. "It was all your idea," shouted Ebenezer at Prosperina. "You insisted that we take the house away from the old man." "Don't you dare put the blame on me," she snapped back. "You were all for it, and so was Ambrose." "I just wanted us to have a stable place to live," Ambrose defended himself. "How could I have known that the house wasn't normal?" "The house isn't abnormal," Octavia said quietly. "The house is fine. It's us. We did the wrong thing." Everyone fell silent, looking at her. "What do you mean?" Ambrose asked. "We took the house away from my father. The house he built with his own hands. The one he loved. It had all his memories of my mom, of me, and we threw it away like a piece of junk." "Don't be dramatic," Prosperina grumbled. "We found him an apartment, paid for the move. Everything is civilized." "Civilized?" Octavia laughed bitterly. "We used a legal loophole to take the house away from him. That's not civilized. It's despicable." "You agreed to it," Ambrose reminded her. "Don't play the innocent victim." "I know," she said quietly, "and I'm as guilty as you are. Maybe more. He's my father, and I betrayed him." Tears came to her eyes and she ran out of the room. I watched her go up to her bedroom, shut the door, and burst into tears as she sat on the bed. Something shook inside me at the sight of her tears. Despite everything she had done, she was still my daughter, the only thing I had left of Ophelia. But it was too late to stop now. My plan was in full swing, and the final chord was going to strike in a couple days when the Pendergasts planned a reception for their friends, the first official event in their new home. I watched them get ready, trying to pretend everything was in order. Prosperina had ordered the catering, Ebenezer had purchased expensive wines, and Ambrose was compiling the guest list. Only Octavia was not involved in the preparations. She spent most of her time in her room, avoiding the rest of the family. And all the while, she kept calling me, time after time, leaving voice messages that grew more and more desperate. "Daddy, please pick up. I need to talk to you. Yeah, I made a terrible mistake. I'm so sorry. Please call me back." But I didn't. I continued to watch them through the cameras, controlling the house's systems, preparing for the final act of my revenge. On the eve of the reception, Octavia made one last attempt to contact me. She didn't just call, she drove to my apartment. I saw through the window her standing at the door, ringing, knocking. I didn't answer it. An hour later she left, leaving a note she slipped under the door. "Daddy, I know you're home. I can see the lights. Please talk to me. I've made a terrible mistake. I want to make it right, but I need your help. There's something strange going on in the house, something scary. Please call me, Octavia." I folded the note and tucked it away in my desk drawer. It's too late, Octavia. It's too late. The day of the reception had arrived. I watched through the cameras as the Pendergasts bustled about, preparing for their guests. Prosperina was nervously double-checking the table settings. Ebenezer was wiping glasses. Ambrose was rehearsing his welcome speech in front of the mirror. Only Octavia stood aside, pale and silent, like a ghost in her own former home. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been methodically driving them to the brink of a nervous breakdown. Unexplained noises in the walls, power outages, plumbing problems, strange whispers at night, all of it had gradually eroded their confidence and composure. But they stubbornly refused to admit defeat. This reception was to be their triumph, proof that they had succeeded, a small and pathetic victory that I was going to turn into a total humiliation. An hour before the reception began, Prosperina gathered everyone in the living room for final instructions. "Tonight is a very important evening," she said, nervously adjusting her pearl necklace. "Among the guests would be some of the most influential people in Aurora. City Councilman Barrymore and his wife, Bank Director McLeish, the Huntingtons. We have to make an impeccable impression. And if things start getting weird again—" "Weirdness again?" Octavia asked quietly. "There won't be any weirdness." Prosperina cut her off. "We have checked all the systems, called the best specialists. The house is in perfect order." "But yesterday was just an accident," Ambrose interrupted her. "A power surge. It'll be perfect today. Yesterday I gave them a dress rehearsal. In the middle of dinner the lights went out, and when they came back on a minute later, the water was rust-colored. The Pendergasts were in a panic, but by some miracle managed to fix everything by morning by calling the emergency services and paying triple the price for emergency repairs. What they didn't know was that I had created all these problems artificially by controlling the house's systems via remote access, and that tonight would be the culmination of my plan." The first guests began arriving around 7 o'clock in the evening. The Pendergast family greeted them at the entrance with strained smiles. Prosperina was resplendent in her evening gown, Ebenezer shaking hands, Ambrose showering them with compliments. Only Octavia stood a little apart with a forced smile on her face. "What a lovely house," admired the old lady in the purple dress as she looked around the spacious living room. "Thank you, Mrs. Huntington," replied Prosperina with false modesty. "We have long dreamed of such a family nest." "Did you build it yourself?" asked a man in an expensive suit who was introduced as a member of the city council. "Oh no," Ebenezer smiled. "We bought it recently, but we felt right away that it was exactly what we'd been looking for all our lives." I grinned bitterly as I watched the spectacle through the monitor. They talked about my house as if it had always belonged to them. Not a word about how they'd swindled it away from an elderly man. Not a hint of remorse. Soon the living room was filled with people. Elegant ladies, respectable gentlemen, all those whom the Pendergasts considered Aurora's high society. They wandered through the rooms, admiring the decor, complimenting their hosts. Waiters served champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Quiet music played. A perfect reception. It was time to get started. First, I turned down the brightness of the lights a bit. Not so much that it was obvious, but enough to create a slight discomfort. Then I lowered the temperature in the living room slightly. Gradually, degree by degree. People began to faint, but wrote it off to the air conditioning. Prosperina was the first to notice the change. I saw her glance nervously at the thermostat, then whisper something in Ebenezer's ear. He shrugs, pretending everything's fine, but there's a look of concern in his eyes. It's time for the next step. I activated the smart home system and began selectively turning off the lights in different parts of the living room. First, the chandelier over the dining table went out, then the floor lamp in the corner, then the wall sconce. Each time the light came back on after a few seconds, but in a different place. The guests began to look around. Some laughed nervously, others frowned. Prosperina, with a frozen smile, tried to explain it away with some minor wiring problems that we'll fix soon. "Strange problems," remarked a man who was introduced as a banker. "I've never seen anything like it." "Oh, it's just an old house." Prosperina waved it off, though her smile became even more strained. "These things happen." "But you said the house isn't old," the woman beside him reminded him. "I believe it's only 30 years old." "Exactly," Ambrose interjected, trying to salvage the situation. "But the wiring. We're planning a complete renovation in the near future." I smiled. It was time to move on to the next stage. Suddenly, a strange grinding sound came from all the speakers on the home alert system. then a crackling sound, and then a low, barely audible whisper, the same one that terrorized the Pendergasts at night. Only now it was louder and more distinct. The guests froze. Prosperina turned pale. Ebenezer looked around nervously, as if searching for the source of the sound. "What is that?" an elderly lady in purple asked, looking around anxiously. "It's probably radio interference," Ambrose said with a strained smile. "We have a home alarm system, and sometimes it picks up interference." At that moment, I turned up the volume, and the whisper became a distinct voice. My voice. "Welcome to my home," I said slowly and clearly. The guests looked at each other in confusion. Prosperina froze with her glass in her hand. Ebenezer turned red. "What kind of joke is this?" he asked loudly, addressing the ceiling. "Turn that off right now." "This isn't a joke, Ebenezer," I replied over the speakers. "This is my house, the house you stole from me." There was dead silence. All eyes turned to the Pendergasts. "What's he talking about?" the councilman asked, frowning. "Nothing," Prosperina replied quickly. "Some kind of technical glitch." "Ambrose, shut that system down." Ambrose rushed to the control panel in the corridor, but I locked it remotely. He pressed the buttons helplessly, but nothing happened. "Don't bother, Ambrose," I said over the speakers. "I control all the systems in this house. My house." "Who's talking?" the banker asked demandingly. "My name is Humphrey Bellingham," I replied. "I built this house 30 years ago with my own hands. For my family. For my wife Ophelia, who died 5 years ago. For my daughter Octavia, who grew up here." All eyes turned to Octavia, who stood with her hands to her mouth and a look of horror on her face. "A month ago, my daughter and her husband, Ambrose Pendergast, along with his parents Ebenezer and Prosperina, swindled me out of this house. They used the power of attorney I signed when I was sick and signed the house over to Octavia. And then they evicted me to a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town." "That's not true," Ebenezer shouted. "He agreed to sell us the house himself." "Did he, Ebenezer?" I grinned. "Then perhaps you can explain to the guests why I didn't get a dime for the house, and why you threatened to call the police if I didn't leave within a week." The guests began to whisper. One of them headed for the exit. "Wait!" Prosperina exclaimed. "This is some kind of misunderstanding. We can explain everything." "Of course you can," I said. "But perhaps this will explain it better." And I turned on the tape of the conversation that had taken place between Ambrose and his parents the day before they had come to me with the ultimatum. A conversation I had recorded through a hidden microphone installed in the house during one of their visits. "The old man will never voluntarily give up the house," Ambrose said on the recording. "He's too stubborn." "Then use a power of attorney," Ebenezer replied. "Octavia said he signed it 2 years ago when he was sick. It's still valid." "And if he resists, what can he do?" "The house will legally belong to Octavia. If he refuses to move out, we'll call the police." "What about Octavia? She might resist." "Don't worry," Prosperina intervened. "I know how to control your wife. A little pressure, a little manipulation, and she'll do whatever we need her to do. She's always been weak-willed, like her mother. The main thing is to get her to sign the papers." Ebenezer continued. "Then we can sell the house and pay off the debts, or mortgage it. Either way, it's worth at least $1 million. "What will happen to the old man?" Ambrose asked. "What does it matter?" Prosperina waved him off. "We'll find him some cheap apartment, or let him look for it himself. Not our problem." There was a heavy silence in the room when the tape ended. The guests looked at the Pendergasts with undisguised disgust. Prosperina was whiter than chalk. Ebenezer clenched his fists as if ready to strike someone. Ambrose looked like he was about to faint. And Octavia? Octavia stood in the middle of the living room, tears streaming down her face, and she made no effort to hide them. "Daddy," she whispered, looking into one of the hidden cameras, as if she knew I was watching. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize. This is outrageous." The first person to break the silence was the councilman. "You swindled an elderly man out of his home? Your wife's father?" "It's not that simple," Ebenezer began to justify himself. "There were certain circumstances." "What circumstances justify stealing?" asked the old lady in purple. "I knew your mother, Prosperina. She would die of shame if she knew what you had done." "We're leaving," said the banker. taking his wife under his arm. And I'm sure everyone else will too. I do not wish to be in a house obtained by such methods. The guests began to disperse, despite the Pendergast's attempts to hold them back. Soon only 4 remained in the parlor: Ebenezer, Prosperina, Ambrose, and Octavia. "It's your fault," Ebenezer shouted at Octavia. "You were supposed to make sure your father didn't have access to the house." "My fault?" Octavia threw her head up. "You manipulated me. You forced me to betray my own father." "No one forced you," Prosperina said coldly. "You signed the documents yourself. You agreed to use the power of attorney yourself. Because you convinced me it was for his own good, that he'd be better off in the apartment, that the house was too big for him, that he couldn't cope. And the truth is, you just wanted to solve your financial problems at his expense." "Shut up," said Ambrose, swinging at her. But the blow didn't come. At that moment, I activated all the systems in the house at once. The lights started flashing at a frantic rate. The speakers blared. All the faucets opened, flooding the bathrooms and kitchen with water. Alarms howled. Doors began to open and close on their own. The Pendergasts froze in horror, looking at the chaos around them. "What's going on?" Prosperina screamed, covering her ears with her hands. "This is home," Octavia shouted back. "The house is protesting against us, against what we have done." At this point, I decided to show up in person. I shut down all systems as suddenly as I had turned them on. There was absolute silence, and then the doorbell rang. The Pendergasts looked around. No one moved. The bell rang again. "Akkurat." "I'll get it," Octavia said at last, heading for the door. There I was, in my best suit, with a small suitcase in my hand. "Daddy," Octavia breathed out, taking a step back. I walked into the house, looked around the living room where the Pendergasts were frozen, and smiled. "Good evening," I said quietly. "Looks like I missed the reception. What a pity." "You," Ebenezer hissed, "you're the one who made this hell." "Yai?" I feigned surprise. "I just came to visit my former home, to see how you're settling in." "Don't pretend," Prosperina exclaimed. "We know it was you who controlled the systems of the house. You set this whole thing up on purpose to humiliate us in front of our guests." "That's an interesting theory," I smiled. "But can you prove it?" They were silent, looking at me with hatred. "I think you should know," I continued, "that I'm leaving Aurora. Found a lovely house in a small town on the coast. Quiet, peaceful place. Perfect for an old man like me." "Leaving?" Octavia asked. "For good." "Yes, dear. There's nothing to keep me here anymore." I saw the pain in her eyes, but I didn't let it soften. "Papa," she took a step toward me, "I'm so sorry to you. I didn't realize what I was doing. They convinced me it was best for everyone. I was blind, stupid. Forgive me, please." "It's too late, Octavia," I replied. "Some things cannot be forgiven." "What do you want?" Ambrose asked sharply. "Money? The house back?" I laughed. "No, Ambrose. I don't want the money or the house. It's yours. Enjoy it, if you can." "What's that supposed to mean?" Ebenezer frowned. "You see," I put my hand around the living room. "This house, it's special. I put a piece of my soul into it when I built it. Every nail, every board, every wire, everything bears the imprint of my hands, my energy. And the house remembers. It remembers who its true owner is." "Nonsense," Prosperina snorted, but there was fear in her eyes. "Maybe," I shrugged. "But explain why the house seems to be protesting against you. Protesting against you? Why did all these strange phenomena start right after I left? Why do they get worse every day?" They were silent, unable to find an answer. "I'm leaving," I said, heading for the door. "Enjoy your new home. If you can live in it, of course." "Wait," Octavia exclaimed, grabbing my arm. "Daddy, don't go like that. We can fix this. I'll remortgage the house back to you. We'll find another place to live." I looked at her for a long moment. "It's too late, Octavia. You've made your choice. Now live with him." I left the house without looking back. I got into my car and drove away, leaving the Pendergasts standing on the doorstep with a look of horror on their faces. I did leave Aurora the next day, found a small house in a seaside town 100 kilometers away. A quiet, peaceful place where no one knew me. But before I left, I set all the systems in the house to automatic. Strange noises, power outages, plumbing problems, all of it would continue. Not all the time, but randomly, so you can't predict when the next outage will occur. I also left a note in the secret place where I kept my tools. A note explaining how to shut down all these systems, how to get the house functioning again. But I doubted the Pendergast would ever find that note. They're too self-righteous, too self-absorbed to look in the right places for answers. As for Octavia, perhaps someday she'll realize that real values aren't in expensive houses or the approval of people like the Pendergasts. Perhaps she will find the strength to break away from them and start a new life. Perhaps one day she'll even find me. But I will not wait for that. I'm starting a new chapter of my life. Without the house I built with my own hands. Without the daughter who betrayed me. Without a past that hurts too much. And the Pendergasts. Let them live in a house that will never be theirs. A house that will forever remind them of their meanness and betrayal. A house that will never accept them as their masters. This is my true revenge. Not the flashing lights or the strange noises. It's the realization that they'll never be truly happy in a stolen house. That every creak in the floorboards, every rustle in the walls will remind them of the person they took the most precious thing from. And that revenge would last forever.